enemy lines.
Episode 7. Galveston. The maglevs that circled Galveston permitted travel to any part of the kilometers-wide rock in under a minute, and so Almada arrived at the meeting point, a roomy commissary serving workers in the nearby power station 1, in less than the 5 minutes Jonah asked to take him. Jonah was already pacing the corridor when Almada's maglev doors opened. The bigger man struggled in with an armful of long-stalked tools. Jonah stepped close and took half of the devices off his hands. They were net guns. They shot a net of adhesive solution, which could quickly pin down cargo in zero-G environments. Very occasionally, they were also used when fights broke out. That happened on the order of once every rotation around the sun or so, but it was the closest thing to an offensive handheld weapon that the Wrights had ever felt the need to stock. They clasped arms, and Jonah felt the man's surprise at his vise-like grip. Then Nestor squeezed to match it, his face offering quiet support that Jonah appreciated. He felt himself master his nerves a little more with the wordless reinforcement Nestor offered. The two made an unlikely pair. Ryle had once said as much, comparing Jonah to a bull and Nestor to an elephant. Nestor didn't move fast, but nothing got in his way, where Jonah was more than willing to hit a wall over and over again until he got past the obstacles in his path. Just like with the Wrights' initial resistance to putting agents on Earth, even for the non-violent purpose of ensuring their technological advances could make it past the filters of the world's giant corporations, and spur the faster pace of development that the observers and the hidden benefactors urged mankind to make. The fact that Jonah wanted to create cell structures, rely on anonymity, employ dead drops, all of which he could control, didn't sit well with the Council either. Until Typhon proved how big a threat they were to data hoarding all the treasures the Wrights were producing, and until Nestor Almada stood up beside him in meeting chambers and lent his support to the plan after their first accidental game of hardball. Their partners had dropped out and they'd spent 2 hours battling to a stalemate, then recovering from near exhaustion together. Somehow Jonah had found the energy to rant about the Council's glacial pace defeating the purpose of the Wrights in the first place. He didn't know he was creating a powerful ally who would also become a very good friend. "This is all you could get?" he asked. "You said you wanted me here fast, Jonah, so you're lucky I could find 4. How is Hume?" Harwood shrugged, as calm as he could manage. Inside, he was reeling between the shock of what was unfolding, and another part of him, the soldier part, was excited. He pushed them both down. "Chen says he's stable, but comatose. That's the first coma for an observer, as far as the diagnostic systems can tell. Dr. Kamaka doesn't have a clue how to get him out of it." Almada clapped one hand on Harwood's shoulder. A trio of Wrights gave them quizzical glances as they crossed to the grab shaft in the opposite wall. "Communications are down in the ship bay, Jonah. Everything all right?" a red-haired man with freckled cheeks asked. He was wearing blue jeans below a flight suit jacket. Jan Vander, the hotshot pilot Bradley Ellis kept losing soccer bets to. That's how the jeans looked so new. The pilot was frowning. He always seemed to be doing that when he saw me, Jonah thought. Processing quickly, he waved the man closer. The pilot was sharp, fast, and comfortable behind the wheel of experimental ships that could, and had, blown up under other men. That weighed more to Jonah right now than the fact that he also stood up in the general meetings to oppose expansion of the sleeper program. Jonah stopped the group and called them over. They obliged, exchanging confused glances with each other. "How's Chen handling things?" Almada went on with their conversation. "Worried as hell, but he won't leave his screens, even with Hume comatose," Harwood said, "which is where we need him to be right now. He's digging for unexploded landmines in the computer cores right now." The newcomers stopped behind Jonah, confusion plain on their faces, as Almada handed each of them one of the tubes he carried. "Hume's in a coma?" asked a short blonde girl with her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "He is, Anderson, yes." The three became very quiet. Jan Vander wore the face of a 20-year-old, long since rejuvenated over his time with the Wrights. Jonah hefted one of the long tubes he carried. Vander was one of Galveston's best pilots. He ran regular runs to Earth and through the ever more crowded asteroid belt. He was smart, too, and he was listening. The cocksure expressions pilots had worn ever since the days of the Wright brothers, the people that Galveston's residents took their name after, was only partially in play now. It shared his face with a skepticism directed at Harwood. "What's going on, Harwood? Does this tie in with the comms blackout?" He held up a hand, cutting off whatever he imagined Jonah was about to say. "Yes, we're on our way to meeting chambers, but why don't ye tell us what's going on? And what do we need these for?" "I hope you don't need it," Jonah said. The words sounded flat and untrue, even as they came out of his mouth. "The observers are being attacked, Vander," Almada said over his shoulder. "I was with Rand when he fell. He died on the spot. I've checked with operations all over the rock. They're all slipping in comas or falling down dead. It can't be a coincidence. It began today, with the arrival of that ship." "The starship pumped something into our air," Jonah said, "but the observers are only a part of the problem." He stepped away from the group as he talked, then turned and looked into the eyes of all assembled. "The new arrivals are not affected. Only our observers went down. It's no coincidence. This is an attack." "Nonsense! They're observers, aren't they?" cried an ebony-skinned woman with green eyes. She shook her head. "Just tell them what's happening. If they're causing it, they'll put it right." Jonah shook his back. "Chen's passing word rock-wide to have all rights turn around before they get to the meeting chambers. Half the whole rock's comms and everything close to the meeting chamber is down, so I need you two to spread out and tell everyone you can to get the word out that I'm ordering everyone to emergency facilities until further notice." Disbelief warred with confusion on most of the faces. "Look, we have never received more than 2 new observers at once?" Harwood asked. There were slow nods. "And all of a sudden there's a shipful at our door?" Galveston's population had topped out at just over 500 humans a decade ago. When a skill was needed or a right succumbed to old age or death, only one at a time were being added. And for their part, the 100-odd observers were as long-lived as the Wrights, which means we all knew them and loved them, Jonah thought. Pain flashed in his guts as he thought of Ryle. "This was scheduled to be a cargo run," he said, controlling his rising temper. "But that ship's not unloading any cargo." The red-haired man, Vander, shrugged. "Jonah, managing the cells on Earth for us must demand you to be suspicious, but please, man. They're observers. Everything we have we owe to the benefactors and to our observers. If you're really concerned, call the council." Jonah ground his teeth. He was the only Wright counselor under 80. As much as he was congratulated on his advancement to council initiate in such a short time, and for his role in successfully expanding the program of Wright cells embedded on Earth, many others still chided him for being young and rashed, and questioned his calls for the Wright cells in the first place. He checked his net gun, released its safeties, and exchanged his for Vander's. "Have you ever seen an observer wearing battle armor?" "What? The black togs?" Vander cocked his head in confusion. "Yeah, I saw them on the holo. Wait, armor? You're not serious." Jonah's finger squeezed the barrel of the net gun. How can they not see this? Alosi had once told Jonah one of the reasons for his appointment as initiate, ahead of older, better qualified Wrights, was the council's belief that his unique skills, learned wearing boots for the U.S. government, made him more adaptable to tragedy and violence without becoming embittered by it, and thus made him the perfect person to lead the Wrights' few interactions, supply and recruitment missions mostly, back to Earth. Despite Alosi meaning his words as a compliment, Jonah had been hurt at the time, hurt by the idea of being advanced to council because some of its members felt they needed a person trained better for deception and violence. But right now, facing the unbelieving Wrights gathered around him, he was glad for that training. His inside screamed something terrible was happening, and he had to make them listen. Vander scoffed again. "Jonah, calm down. So they're wearing clothes." Jonah took another gun from Vander, checked it was loaded, and passed it to another surprised Wright. "Have you ever known an observer to overrule us? Argue, sure, but they've never given us a single command. These ones, they've ordered us all to abandon station and meet them as a whole in the meeting chamber. Meanwhile, the umbilicals on that starship are injecting code into the core and something into the environmental system. Something that makes our observers sick. Hume collapsed right next to me in CNC. They're trying to take control of Galveston." Stunned silence settled over the group. Jonah handed the last gun off in the silence. "Chen," he asked aloud when he was done. "I'm listening," came the voice, tight, pinched, and louder than usual, as if Chen was standing right beside Jonah's shoulder. "What's happening in the chamber?" "Hundreds are there already," came Chen's etchy voice again. "They're waiting." "It's odd, Jonah, that the observers are standing in a circle facing outwards, but refuse to speak to those gathered. Okay, I'm reading an energy build-up. It's focused around the new observers, Jonah." Ice dread formed in the pit of Harwood's stomach. "Broadcast the following to each right's individual channel. By order of council, you are to return to your quarters immediately." After a startled silence, the disembodied voice agreed. "Captured your voice and sending it. I don't know how much is going to get through." Jonah met Almada's worried gaze. "We gather to bring wisdom to the world," Jonas said. Almada nodded. "And we strive that the world may endure." Everyone on Galveston knew the line of poetry. It was something written by the first rights. "Very well," Nestor said, and looked around at the others. They were still unsure, still holding their guns awkwardly. "A councillor's given us orders. Let's give him what he needs." "Jonah!" Chen's voice shouted over his ear. "The ship just tore free of the airlock. It ripped clean free. It's pouring on thrusters. Oh, God." The man said something Jonah couldn't catch. "The core's shutting down." Jonah felt his blood run cold. "Redundant systems are dropping. It's going to blow." Chen's voice disappeared. The ground shuddered beneath Jonah's feet, and he saw panic dawning in every eye around him. It was impossible. All of this was impossible. But Jonah had been right. They were under attack. New York City. It had taken Alex only a few breaths to get her shock under control. She'd hit a few bumps in her plans over the years, but that just made the score more satisfying once she was done and away clean. What she had felt when she saw the vault was fear, but now it was turning to thrill. The door had to be for show, she reasoned to herself. But even as she thought it, she knew the folks that ran the place couldn't expect clients to be that stupid. The door was obviously bolted to a solid exterior wall. But her every instinct screamed against the facts that the massive door was the real deal. Alex stuck her tongue into the corner of her mouth as she assessed matters. No alarms ringing, and other than the impossible door, she hadn't encountered a single surprise. The drugs were where the client had said. The intel on the guard's schedule had been solid, and she had goods in hand. Whatever the door was, it wasn't part of a trap. And so, as her panic eased, her curiosity flared. She pushed the lock to the refrigerated door behind her all the way open until it clunked flat against its neighbor loudly. Her mind was too distracted to care that she made sound. In the light from the refrigerator, her eyes ran over the bolts and raised lines of the alloy bands that crisscrossed the entire door. A casual observer might look at the door and think, impressive. Alex, however, a professional thief, looked at the door and saw a structure unlike any other on the market. Nobody made this door. Nobody in the private sector, anyways. She crossed her arms and stepped forward, appraising the workmanship and judging it a masterpiece. Had she missed a hidden room? She walked to the door, pushed her head far enough into the hall to confirm the room was flush with the staircase across the way. She shook her head again. It was flush with the outer wall, for sure. She spun back into the room and let the door close with a thump. What the hell? She yanked her hoodie down and rubbed her hands through her red hair, an exasperated frown spreading on her face. She looked at her watch. She'd been in the room for 3 minutes. Any delay was a risk, but she'd watched the security guard meander around the building 3 nights in a row before tonight. It would be at least 12 minutes before he checked every external door and worked through 2 more cigarettes. Shikoshitoku, she whispered to herself. One must act to gain advantage. I'll take 5 minutes, she said aloud to the empty room. Now, she pulled a headlamp out of yet another pocket and slid it on, in place with ease, her mind again absorbed with the mystery vault. Tell me your secrets, pretty thing. Galveston. Vander gasped for breath as the echoes of his footfalls faded down the corridor behind him. He recognized the numbers on the narrow walls. The access corridor would lead to a grav shaft before long, just a level above the entrance to the meeting chamber. Harwood was behind him, gulping air as well. Not pale like Vander was, though, and he kept his mouth shut, his eyes forward, and he moved fluidly. Vander still didn't want to admit it, but he was scared. He fought off the panic he was sure Harwood could read in his eyes. He wasn't buying all of Jonah's fearful theories, but the man himself surely believed the danger to them was real, and Chen said bad things were happening. and the ground was still shaking beneath his feet. He watched Harwood kneel in a patch of shadow and stared ahead to where the corridor curved. That's where the access to the grav shaft would be. We just jump through it, we talk to these new observers, and we get some answers. The thought seemed solid to him, but his fingers still tightened on the barrel of the cargo net gun he carried. What? Oh, no. Jonah's head shook, and he stood suddenly, strength and controlled violence radiating from his every motion. Vander looked back into the patch of shadow. He stepped closer. On the cold metal plating was the body of a gray observer. Its eyes were milky, blood and froth dripped from its nose and mouth. Vander sagged down next to the body. He pushed the red and white sash off the observer's shoulder and touched the skin. Still warm, bloody warm, feverish. He touched its head and felt the fever not yet cooled from the body. Then he looked back to the sash. Red and white. His blood thundered in his ears. This was Sart. An Arsenal fan, soccer fan. They watched the matches together. Sart was a riot to watch when he got excited during a match, jumping up and chanting, "Up the arse!" along with the rest of the Arsenal crowd. Vander felt himself fall sideways. He put out an arm numbly to catch himself as the universe spun around him, faster than it should. "What do we do?" he whispered, not really to Harwood, not really expecting an answer. Harwood was looking down on a diagonal through the last grav shaft between this floor and the next. Distant, nervous murmurs of his fellow Wrights filtered through, but Vander couldn't see anything through the flickering shimmer in the shaft. The grav field was unstable. The meeting chamber lay just a meter past the entrance to the shaft, and Vander did not want to go through. He believed it all now, and he was grateful for being hidden out of sight. Those 7 creatures, just through there. Even as part of him snarled and hated himself for the need to hide, now that he knew that his friends were being herded into the meeting chamber, he wanted to shout, he wanted to scream. He wondered if any of them would make it out, but he was suddenly too afraid to ask Harwood, too afraid of what Harwood might ask him to do. He looked over at Jonah. Christ, he was smiling, but not with joy. No, it was a dangerous smile, a skull's smile. Harwood looked back to Vander, grinning. "Been a long time since I left before I looked," he said. Vander felt his stomach drop. They were going forward. The air shrieked with a warning klaxon, but the sound was cut off before the first tone completed. Chen's voice sifted weakly in the air between them. "Something's fighting me for systems control. I can't stop it." "Shing! The alarms cut themselves off. The safeties are all offline. Jonah, the plants are all being primed to explode." Another vibration, this one far stronger, rose through the deck plating to push Vander off balance. He grabbed the side of the grav shaft so as not to fall through. Explosions at the generators. People worked on those generators. People, therefore, had just died. His fear shrunk into a ball in his stomach, still there, but somehow silenced now. "We have to do something," Vander snarled. "We will." Harwood's voice was hard, and there was something in it Vander had never heard from the man before. Not rage, not cruelty. Something cold, deliberate, and it frightened him almost as much as the murderers that were now aboard his home. Vander had been one to make sport of Harwood before. He called him Jarhead to friends in private. Sure, Vander had understood the need for expanding the network of rights on Earth, and he did appreciate how Harwood, a former soldier and spy, had managed to wrangle the Wrights' inventions into circulations faster than ever before. That was what the Wrights were here to do, and something the observer said was of the greatest import. But he never understood, never until this day, that there was real jeopardy, even here in space, alone beneath Galveston's shielding rock. For a moment, Vander wished he still believed in a god, to lend him the strength to help him save his fellow Wrights. Vander heard a groaning sound from somewhere far off, like fatigued metal being twisted. A moment later, he felt a stronger vibration climb up his legs. Then the quakes died as quickly as they'd come, leaving him panting and struggling to control his heaving chest. He listened hard when he saw Harwood freeze in place, and then he realized the air had gone suddenly still. It was a small thing, the constant moving of the wind through the corridors, but the second it stopped, sweat pricked Vander's neck. The air was there because the Wrights had put it there. It moved and stayed fresh because the Wrights made it move. Otherwise, pockets of CO2 formed, and people died. Vander had lived with the air for so long. He felt its stillness around him like a weight pulling him down. People died here like everywhere, but Vander's illusions of being above the violence, apart from the danger, were shattered away. Vander felt the weight settle in his guts, something he didn't know how to move. Fear again, up and down like a roller coaster, paralyzed. It was something worse than his shame at riding Harwood for his paranoia in the first mess of all this. What had those seconds that we wasted cost? He felt the world could split in half now, and any madness could fall through the tear. His fear grew, and it rooted him to the deck plating. Harwood, Amada, the core's safeties are back up, but we lost Plant 5's core before... The fear metastasized through Vander's body when he heard Chen's voice tremble and fall away. Jonah, I have to go silent. If I don't get these devils out of my systems, we're all going to be dead. His voice changed to a pinched hiss, as if he were fighting off tears. You get them, Jonah. The quality of the air changed as the background hiss of Chen's open circuit winked out. We will, Harwood swore again. Vander looked back at him. There was a challenge in Harwood's eyes. A dare. Vander looked back as a chemical reaction took place inside him, an alchemy turning that immobilizing ball of fear into fury as he was caught in that look, challenged by it, rising to meet that challenge as his friend's body cooled on the floor beside him. Vander lifted the strap of his net gun and nodded. We will, he promised. I don't think you will, came a woman's voice, cool and haughty, from behind them. Vander shouted in surprise, turned and raised the sticky gun, to see Third Counselor Moledved standing there, eyes wide, mouth open, smiling rapturously. There was something glistening on her chin, falling in thin, viscous trails to the ground. Vander realized she was sweating, shivering fiercely. He stood and walked towards her. Irina, what happened? She shrieked and swung a fist at his head. He saw stars and tumbled to the ground, rolling. He tried to shake off the ringing in his ears and the nausea in his guts, and struggled to his feet. His head swam, and his body had trouble with the familiar motions required to stand. And he fell again. He leaned against the wall and rubbed his jaw. Was that Irina Moledved's fist, or a bull's horn? He looked up and froze. Irina held a knife in her hands, facing down. Her fist was wrapped around the hilt. What's happening, Vander? Gods, let me show you, she purred. She shrieked and ran towards him, the knife slicing through the air towards his head.
You have been listening to Enemy Line, a serialized audiobook by John Miro. Music, Damage by Damagefall. For more information, visit damagevault.com.